So wait till you Omnes, I am Ruminous, and here we're going to talk about gameplay today. First thing I want to mention is I'm working on getting some of the video and audio things fixed. I'm messing with the filters, so hopefully it looks a little bit better. I can still tell there's a lot of grain. I plan to get a light for my face eventually, but that might come in a couple weeks. So it's getting there. Sorry if it's the audio quality isn't there. Anyway, we're gonna talk about gameplay today, and we're gonna talk about the overall gameplay. I'm gonna make separate videos for the specific different parts of gameplay and kind of break them down. However, I'm going to spend the video just talking about overall gameplay and how they all fit together and make a game either good, bad, mediocre, and can make some parts of the game good or bad, that kind of thing. So gameplay is broken into key aspects of movement, control, view, growth, flow, sustainability, and difficulty. Mechanics are a major part of gameplay as well, but they are so important, and I consider them different, that I put them into different videos. I'll have a whole different set of videos on them. So often reviewers will lump both gameplay aspects and mechanics together into one single piece, which to me seems destructive to each individual member of the Unity, because they kind of work together in different aspects. They will all work together to make the core of the experience, but each one is just as important as the rest. So mechanics for me are the parts of the game, like the code. So gameplay is I press X to jump, where a mechanic is you jump 3 meters forward but 1 meter up. So the mechanics are the code and the things you can't necessarily mess with particularly, or they don't have buttons for. Older games, like Mega Man Legends, have nice atmosphere and story, but the aspects of the controls, the difficulty, and the view are lacking. Does this mean that it's terrible to play? Maybe not the people who played at the time, like me. It actually is one of my favorite games. I thoroughly enjoyed. I think it's got a great story. But with the problems that it has with the gameplay aspects, for people who, after 30 years of improvements, especially as games developed with the cameras around an analog stick, which this game didn't have analog sticks. They didn't exist at the time. Didn't mean to interrupt map time. Excuse me, sir, I can't aim. Ow! It can be really jarring. It can be really problematic, and it can impair the overall experience, especially in the harder difficulties where it's even more challenging because, man, I don't even have all the options available to me. Whenever veteran and successful developers are questioned, they often mention how gameplay was the core of everything. If a game is aggravating, difficult to control, or just boring, people will skip it or stop playing. I spent a long time researching how to keep players engaged and having fun. Difficulty can challenge a player and entice those who enjoy the game to master it, but poor controls and improper scaling of difficulty can turn players away. Every choice matters, especially in this game. Ah, man, the graphics. What dog shit. Where, a lot of the gameplay aspects aren't up to par, and then you put in this harder difficulty, it's not fun. It's just not enjoyable for most people. In my teaching days, this was true for my lessons. If I made something too complex, too tedious, too overwhelming, it discouraged my students, even if the content was good. I've seen this at the end of games at a gauntlet where they typically just throw everything at you, and it can be fun, it can be enjoyable, but the problem often becomes is that they don't really think about what they're doing. So you end up with this just giant calamity of things that just doesn't make sense. And as you look at my example here, it starts off pretty good. A lot of people are going to be looking at this and freaking out. But this is kind of basic things that when you're studying radicals and exponents, these are basic rules you got to follow. And it's just simplified as much as possible. You got to follow basic rules. Can I do anything in the square root? Can I do distributive property? And the first example is yes. And you kind of go through and you have these basic examples. And this is where the last example, I think that I personally didn't do a good job. With the first couple examples, they have 1 or 2 steps you got to follow. It's not a lot of math you got to do. If you know your rules, it's very simple. You can kind of get it done. If you're kind of struggling in math, you can take a minute or two, look over your notes, and that's fine. But this last example is so much. There's so many steps. The other ones were 2 steps. This is like 6 or 8. And although it's nothing really too complex, it's just so much. It's so compacted. It's hard for people who are learning this to kind of figure it out because I didn't lead you properly to it. I started you off with kind of baby steps. I got you there. I kind of had a flow going. I had a good growth, everything. And then I just hit you hard with something. Even though it's within the realm of your abilities, it is so overwhelming that I personally think I failed with this example, and I could have cut this down a little bit more to maybe 3 or 4 steps, add a little more, keep it complex, but not so much that is disorienting. Developers of platformers may spend most of the time adjusting and refining the movement of the character before they even begin to design. What's the point of designing the game if the character's speed, height, flow will all be altered heavily in production, which will then cause the levels design to fail? Could be design levels first, and based on moving on that, developers of racing games may spend most of their time focusing on the controls of the different cars, so they may have a different diversity of vehicles, but so that none of them are the best. So a lot of times when you're dealing with these intense action games, whether it's platformers or fighting games or racing games, you might want to design everything first to kind of base it off of that, because it's going to be hell to kind of design half the game and then go back and change all these values later on. Everybody ignored my health. I obviously did fantastic there. Number one, no one needs to look at my health or any of the rest of that video. Actually, you know what? Just do a screenshot. The original Crash Bandicoot games each had different jumping movements and physics, as they developed the different games, because as I mentioned before, they kind of designed the physics first and then developed the levels later on as they needed them. But the Insane Trilogy had the same momentum for each game, which sounds nice, but the consistency there across the remade games, you can kind of, you know from as you play the first game to the second to the third, how Crash is going to move and act. But they also designed the levels to kind of be one-to-one with the old games as much as possible, and the first game had a lot of perfect jumps or very precise lands, which often led to a lot of issues as people played the game because it felt unfair. You bitch! Because the levels were not necessarily designed to fit the exact physics that were designed for Crash. Because gameplay is such a complex topic, I won't do an intensive example of a game to show the finer points, since I'll go into each aspect individually. Rather, here I'll go over a game that I think have generally good gameplay aspects, and one that I think it has poor gameplay aspects. Doesn't mean necessarily that the game is bad. It just means that it has some aspects that could be improved on, and that it kind of impair the overall experience, as I kind of mentioned before with Mega Man Legends. The first generation of Pokemon, Red, Blue, Yellow, Green, I believe has good gameplay aspects. The movement is simple, you move in one of the four cardinal directions. Up, down, left, right. The character will move one square per step, and so the control was very precise. With one square, we know exactly where the character will end up when we press the button. The movement is slow enough to manage easily, pressing the confirm and deny buttons work as intended. The view of the game is perfect. It's a 15 by 10 grid, so we can see nearly 8 steps in every direction. We know where we're going to end up, we know what's around us, we can see dangers ahead of us. We're not really surprised by anything. It's all nice and laid out. It's very nice for the areas with the ice or speed bad things, especially because you can kind of see where you're going to end up, where you're going, and kind of plan your route. And obviously it's a puzzle, but you're not blindsided, you're not obfuscated in any way. The growth is pretty linear. We know that each area will have Pokemon scaled to about 5 to 8 levels from the last area. We will encounter new Pokemon. Oh, Meowth! That's very cute! Mewtwo, murder this man! And fight a specific type in the gym. Kind of the same way it goes. It's every Pokemon game. That's just how it goes, every single time. The flow of the game is pretty linear as well. We go to a new area, we do some sort of quest or some sort of mission to get the gym leader available so we can fight them. We beat the leader, we get the badge, and then we move on to whatever's next. We move on to the next area, we get some HM or whatever. Nothing really ever made the game go slower or faster except for Snorlax and the Ghost Tower. Those required you to kind of investigate and navigate and do all these sorts of things. For kids, it's not overly complex, and it matches. It's kind of slow, it keeps kids' attention, it's supposed to take time. So even though it's a little bit slow and sluggish, it's not too bad because that's its purpose. Its purpose was to be an adventure. The sustainability of the game was good for its age and its first playthrough, but now its speed and UI are a bit cumbersome, as games are getting a little faster, navigating through these menus is a little more tedious and annoying. But for the technology we had, it worked and it did its job. If you're constantly switching out Pokemon, you were always at a lower level, which I believe is a detriment to the gameplay itself. The encouragement is to keep the Pokemon that you have, even though it's trying to get you to catch everything, it doesn't want you to use everything. Because if you change your Pokemon out, you're constantly at a disadvantage because you're actually lower than what you should be. You have the Pokemon Center, which allows you to heal your Pokemon for free, which is nice, so you can actually train your Pokemon and grind, but it takes time, and it's kind of annoying. You have your Pokeballs, you have different types of Pokeballs that you can catch, but the higher level Pokemon that you say, I don't want to train, I just want to go to the last area, get these level 50s, level 60s or whatever, but they're harder to catch, which is fine. You know, it's a balancing act. But then you have the issue of, why am I spending the time to catch this Pokemon that is actually 10 or 12 levels below my Charizard or my Squirtle or whatever that you pick. It's better to have one main squad with strong starters than to switch out and with equal levels. And that's kind of the imbalance it has, is that if you just focus on 1 or 2 Pokemon to level up and grind, you know, kind of vary the types out, you can just steamroll through most of the game. Most of it's not an issue. And as long as you kind of keep that flow, you kind of break the game, and I think that's an issue with the design that they kind of didn't think out, or they didn't think would be so prevalent as it kind of is. The difficulty is hardly present once the fundamentals again figure out. You know, you get a high level, you use a weakness, you use certain items, you know, all these certain things, but it's suitable for kids. Again, the game is not supposed to be complex, it's not supposed to be super difficult, it's supposed to be water beats fire. Electric beats water. Grass beats water as well, I believe. Actually, I don't remember. But anyway, you have your super effectives, you have your regular effectives, you have not very effectives, and it's pretty easy to figure out, or kind of easy to test out. So it's supposed to be that way because it's designed for kids. It's not designed for adults. It's not designed to be necessarily puzzling. It's supposed to be simple. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a game I believe has poor gameplay aspects. It's not a bad game in itself, but it needs improvements. I personally enjoy the game. I think it's entertaining, but it's kind of good for one playthrough, and it's not something I would necessarily recommend to a lot of people because of the issues that it has. The movement is fine. You can run, sprint, jump, aim, shoot, climb, all these good things. The speed of the actions is enough to match the gameplay and what it needs to do. The jump is a bit floaty, but it's fine to match the game. Like, you know, it doesn't have to always be realistic, and I kind of prefer a floaty jump in these type of games, because it's not necessarily, it is somewhat of a platformer, but it's not a precise platformer. It's not meant there to challenge your platforming skills. It's just there to be fun. And so being it floaty and kind of unrealistic, that's perfectly fine. The control was fine as well. Lara moves and jumps when I ask her to, and the shooting is responsive without too much recoil. The game hardly grows, however, and there are hardly any gunfights. There are a few tombs, but not enough to mask that there's hardly anything else to do in the game. The story progresses weirdly, where she goes on a rampage, then calms immediately afterwards. It kind of has a lot of emotional shifts within like a minute and a half. Again, this would be really cool if there was way more of a build up to this. Much like in Uncharted, the first game has her very afraid to kill people, and it messes with her mentally, and now she's just massacring people left and right, with apparently absolute delight and joy. And Jesus Christ, dude, I was standing. I wasn't even a threat. I wasn't aiming my gun. Did I do it? Yeah, you should be really, careful with the explosives. Because this is what happens when you go wonton with the explosives. They knock you in your ass. Now she's upset. Where did you come from, by the way? First of all, where did you come from? Second, really bad on the game's story to reveal this immediately. Hey, yo, girl. What the fuck was that?
Making everything worse.
You're not. Hey, you're not. We can do this.
Are we just gonna ignore the fact that I
Come on.
literally just
Where to next?
went on a rampage?
Can't stay here.
I don't know, Jonah!
What was that clue? The heart of the serpent. Something.
The heart of the serpent is in the cup near the many stone faces.
And what kind of cup are we talking about? Some kind of chalice?
Chalice that's not very Mayan. Wait,
And now I've had a realization, so all of my emotions completely dissipate.
what would I do without you?
He didn't do anything. He literally just reminded you of the clue that you already knew and in fact corrected him on. And then you did the typical movie nonsense of where you just figure it out. Are we really not going to talk about how in the past 45 seconds I went from absolute Terminator rampage to complete and utter emotional breakdown to everything's cool and I'm fine? Like, that kind of thing has an emotional effect on people. That kind of thing tears people down, that gives them PTSD. That kind of thing also, as Jura, would be like, hey, we need to talk about that. That was uncool. And this is like in gameplay, in game universe. A minute and a half, she goes from full on rampage, gonna kill everybody, does that, and then goes to weeping, sobbing, and then goes to everything's fine, I'm gonna finish this mission, I'm happy and jolly. What happened? The story remains pretty stagnant until the very end, where everything kind of ramps up. You have the climax of the story, but it's kind of stagnant throughout the rest of the game. It has a weird progressive jump, just like I mentioned before with the rampage. The flow, thus, is pretty bad. Since when there's growth, it is sudden and jarring, and it feels out of place at times. The tools that we get are useful, but only for progressing the story, so nothing really changes in the gameplay, except for the skills, which are hardly useful, and they lock you into a selected path, really. The sustainability in the game is pretty poor because the story's lackluster, the game hardly changes, and what is there is mediocre. The tomb puzzles are fun, but there's not enough of them to make it worthwhile. The difficulty is hardly present in the game, but it is superbly presented to the game. The game has preset difficulties, but allows the player to kind of pick and choose certain aspects that they want to change, which I think is very good for people that, want certain things to be more difficult, but, I really don't care about this. There's not enough gunfights to make this more difficult. I don't really care about this. I want the tombs to be challenging, and that's very good on the game that I think they did really well. Thanks everybody for watching. I am Ruminous, and this has been a video on gameplay aspects in their entirety. We will focus on the next video on a singular aspect, such as control, and we will then kind of go from there. We will continue to do the single aspects and see how they work with the nitty-gritties, how they influence the game in singular aspects or overall, and just kind of focus on one aspect and how important it is to the gameplay, to a genre, to a singular aspect of platformers, all that kind of stuff, whatever it is that we're doing. So if you like this video, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell, all that kind of stuff. If you have criticisms, if you think I did something wrong, if you have any information that you think is also relevant, that should be implemented as well, also put those comments down below. I'm not perfect. Sometimes I make mistakes. But we will continue on next week with a singular video on the gameplay aspect of Control. Thanks everybody for watching. Wale te omnes.